This week on the show, we're going into one of my favorite topics, which is food as medicine from a Chinese medicine perspective. So on this episode, I really get into some of the main patterns that I see within my clinical practice. And if you want more of a foundational episode, I will link that in the show notes. So some of the patterns, or the patterns rather, that I get into are spleen Qi deficiency, damp accumulation in the middle jiao, cold accumulation, stomach fire, stomach yin deficiency, liver overacting spleen, and then a little touch on blood deficiency. I also talk about how to decipher pain due to Qi deficiency versus pain due to Qi stagnation, how dampness forms in the body. It's one of the 6 main pathogens, and which can lead to a lot of sort of illnesses and Western diagnoses, but I get into the pathway for a mental illness. And I sprinkle in some information about the microbiome, which is something that really excites me. And then I answer some of your questions that you asked me on Instagram. I am just so in love with the wisdom and the perspective that is this indigenous medicine. And when you hear it, it truly just makes sense. Something in it just clicks. Looking at the body in terms of yin and yang and life force and the way the pathways flow. So it's such an honor to share this with you, and I hope you enjoy. Oh, and if you feel like I'm spitting some truth for you and it's really opening your eyes to what may be happening in your body and you are a little bit overwhelmed on what the next step is, well, I'm happy to work together. You can find my information, my contact information in the show notes, and also check out the show notes because I've linked some really great articles. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephanie. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. All right, well, I am running on very minimal sleep at the moment, so I'm going to do an extra effort to stay as linear and coherent as possible here. But all that being said, I'm going to be weaving in and out of concepts within Chinese medicine. I would say, it's not officially part 1, but it's called the energy of our food, Whispers of the Energy of the Food, linked in the show notes. I get more into the foundations of Chinese medicine in terms of food therapy. I talk about 5-element theory, yin and yang theory. Theories are very necessary and important to understand pattern diagnosis and just sort of the philosophy that we're looking at our food with. I also talk about temperature. So I'm not going to get into all of that in this podcast. I'm going to come at it from a different lens of tapping into foundations by really focusing around patterns. All of that being said, a couple of caveats with Chinese medicine. The first is when I talk about organs, I'm not talking about your actual organs from an allopathic Western mindset. I'm really referring more to the energetic pathways of your organs. And to give you some context as to why this is such an emphasis in Chinese medicine, we can look at the origins of this medicine. It was formed I believe in an alternative history in Chinese. This podcast is not about that, but a lot of it was formed through the practice of cultivating energy, also known as qigong, and also for years. So Chinese medicine practitioners, the really famous ones who wrote all the books, were kind of worked under like a centralized sort of, not centralized, but they worked under like the big authority. They were like men who represented authority in society in a lot of ways. And so it was illegal to do autopsies in China back in those days. So yes, I'm sure that there were people doing it anyways, but that's not the origins. The origins of Chinese medicine, again, are more energetic. So also, the names that I'm going to give the organs, so the 12 main organs in Chinese medicine: lung, large intestine; spleen, stomach; heart, small intestine; something called the triple burner, also known as sanjiao. Pausing there, we have an upper burner, which brings in the upper orifices, the sinus cavities, the throat, the lungs, the heart. Then we have a middle burner. That is the digestive pathways, the intestinal pathways, as well as the liver and the gallbladder. But liver and gallbladder goes a little bit, tiny bit, just because of how the pathway runs into the lower burner or lower jiao, which would be all of our reproductive organs, as well as kidneys and bladder. So there's sanjiao, and then there's pericardium. I'm not going to really touch on pericardium here, but it's kind of known as like the protector of the heart. And in a lot of ways, in Western medicine, it is. It's the muscle layer that wraps around the heart. And then finally, we have the bladder and the kidney. So because, again, of the origins of this indigenous medicine, I am using Western names here, right? So the spleen is not, there's no word for spleen in traditional Chinese medicine or in ancient Chinese medicine. So, take every name that I give with a grain of salt. I'm really using the name as a form of context. And then the last few caveats I want to give is, yin and yang. We look at everything in the body. First, like when we're doing diagnosis, one of the first things we look at is this a case of yin excess or yin deficiency, or yang excess or yang deficiency? If you look at that perfect yin and yang symbol of the spiraling energy, that's ideal. That's the ideal. But that's not how things always are. Yin is the energy of fluid, of holding. It's different from an esoteric point of view, because I think the word feminine to describe yin is a very limiting description. So again, fluid, holding, nourishing, cooling, and slow moving. It's more curved, while yang is more linear, fiery, uplifting. Yin moves down, yang moves up. Back of the body is yang, front of the body is yin. What else? Oh, yang is constantly moving. So there are yin and yang organs. In terms of digestion, I was actually going to say like the main organs are going to be yin, but that's not true, because the stomach, so the spleen in Chinese medicine is a yin organ, and we will get all into the spleen in a second, but the stomach is actually a yang organ, because the stomach is constantly moving and transporting all the things. And then I'm not going to really, I don't think, get really into 5-element theory on this podcast, but in case I do, it's this theory that there's 5 elements: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. And if you look up 5-element theory, which I have put in the show notes a link to a diagram that I really like, you're going to find arrows: fire pointing to earth, earth pointing to metal, metal pointing to water, water pointing to wood, wood pointing to fire. So this represents that each element transforms and influences and can insult each other. There's also going to be a star pattern that's where things get a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to get too far into it. But what I also think is really beautiful about 5-element theory is there's this whole taxonomy of color, smell, taste, sound, emotions that are associated with the 5 elements. So that really, it's a really, once you get the hang of it, it's a really great way to just quickly categorize things to understand what's going on in your body. Because that's my whole intention with this podcast. These whispers here are really the first whispers that I very consciously dove into with Chinese medicine. Back in 2020, I was really struggling with digestive issues, having reactions to everything I ate, and didn't know what was wrong. Doctors were telling me, you're fine, just take an antacid or a Prilosec, and looking at and recommending other things. And I was like, I don't want to affect my bone density when I'm only 24 years old. Or I felt like this isn't going, I just looked up what are the repercussions of this. And thus I was thrown into the world of quote unquote alternative, I like to call it original medicine. So yeah, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And there are charts of the 5 element theory where the earth is at the very center. The earth element is gonna include the main organs that are responsible for digestion, which are the spleen and the stomach. And so personally, as a tummy girl, all my lessons are begin with my tummy, whether if it's a gut feeling, feeling that there's something off, or just learning more through my digestive pathways about herbalism, food therapy. Truly, I believe in my world, when I listen to the whispers of the earth element and really embrace them, it opens up so many new pathways. Well-nourished humans are capable humans. Okay, let's get into the first one. Spleen Qi deficiency. So as I mentioned before, the spleen is a very yin organ, and its element is earth. And screw it, we'll do more 5 element here. Its color is yellow. Its sound is singing. I have been taught that it's kind of, you think of a worried, sing-songy mother, that sing-songy voice. Its emotion is worry. And its job, so a really important player that I'm going to be mentioning a lot here is Qi, our life force energy. Qi has a lot of responsibilities in the body, and when it comes to these energy pathways, Qi takes on certain characteristics. So when it comes to the meridian of the spleen, the role of the energy of the spleen, its job is to hold and lift. So if somebody has a spleen Qi deficiency, they're going to be feeling themselves like kind of dragging, feeling heavy. They could have hemorrhoids. They may have prolapse, anal or vaginal. They could have common reoccurring miscarriages. If somebody bruises easily, that's a sign, because another job that it has is holding the blood. Again, that yin nature, holding, and blood is very yin. So holding the blood in the vessel. So if somebody bruises easily, the spleen Qi is very deficient. So the role of the spleen is to transform and transport the Qi and the blood that we ingest and accumulate from our food. So huge influence on all fluids and nutrients. It is also known as the source of our postnatal Qi. So I've tapped into this on the show, but our prenatal Qi comes from our parents. When they conceive, their essence or Jing comes together and creates a bam spark of life that becomes you. And so that constitution that we are born with is our pre-heaven or prenatal Qi. Then our post-heaven or postnatal Qi is our constitution is influenced by our food that we eat, the Qi from our food. I've touched on this a lot in the show. So let's talk a little bit about more symptoms of spleen Qi deficiency. In terms of bowel movements, it's common to have more loose, messy stools, kind of like feeling a little bit incomplete. It also can manifest as having like a dull, distending, bloating sensation in the abdomen. When it comes to qi in general, when there is a qi deficiency sort of pain, it's going to be a dull and distending, because qi can be deficient within other pathways, whether that's the heart qi, whether that's you can have qi deficiency within a channel, qi deficiency in like due to an injury, yada yada. So it's, again, dull distending pain that improves with touch. So say if you're trying to figure out, am I spleen qi deficient? I do match these sort of symptoms. But if you press your tummy and rather than it improving with touch, if it actually feels worse with touch, then that's a different pattern called qi stagnation. So I think it's really important to, for me at least, it was really important to understand that defining factor when it came to deficiency or stagnation, because the treatment principle is going to be, and how you're going to eat is going to be very different. So back to a few more symptoms that are really classic are fatigue, especially after eating your meals. Feeling a weakness, especially in the limbs and the muscles. The spleen has a strong influence on the muscular system. So feeling a weakness or even a heaviness in the muscles, as well as a lack of appetite. Brain fog. Brain fog is also, and that actually brings me into a really important player here, dampness. So we in Chinese medicine have main pathogens that can affect and influence the body. They can be from external, from outside in the world. They can be from our food, that also includes outside in the world, but also they can be manifested from within, from other patterns. So they are wind, cold, summer heat, dampness, which I'll get into, dryness, and fire. So dampness, its element is, can you guess it? Earth. And it's associated with late summer. Think of in Florida, hurricane season. So dampness is such an interesting quality to me. I like when I heard about wind and cold and dryness and fire, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But like, ooh, what is dampness? And being in Florida, it totally makes sense as well. But it's really, when I talk about it with other people, they're very intrigued, but it's also this sort of mystery. So how I like to visualize dampness is, I think of a bowl of fruit that's been forgotten. And it's laying in that bowl, and over time, the fruit decomposes and mold starts to grow on it. And so that's how I visualize dampness in the body. And how it manifests in the body is through a lot of the similar symptoms that I mentioned. So feeling bloating, nausea, even vomiting, diarrhea, edema, or heaviness in the abdomen, just heaviness in the muscles in general, feeling like a sweatband headache, like feeling a pressure from just above the eyebrow wrapping around the cranium. What else? Eczema can be a sign, or even dandruff or psoriasis. A lot of skin conditions are actually strongly influenced by dampness. And so the spleen pathways, as well as the stomach, are really strongly influenced by this pathogen of dampness. The last sort of symptoms I want to touch on in terms of one of the big things that we do in Chinese medicine to really confirm a diagnosis is listen to your pulse, as well as look at your tongue. And so a spleen qi deficient tongue can really be any color, but I would say that it tends to be more towards the pale side. It's also a very thick tongue, and it will have teeth marks on the side. The coat will be a either thick white coat or like a slimy looking coat. Like the tongue will look damp. It'll look kind of slimy. The coat will look kind of furry and thick. But talking about the teeth marks are also a sign of other symptoms, other patterns. So I mention this because I don't want you to look at your tongue and be like, oh, I'm spleen Qi deficient. No, it has to match all the puzzle pieces. And that's where pulse also comes in. A spleen Qi deficient pulse it might feel slippery, which I'm not going to really get too much into pulse because it's just like a whole art form that would take a whole podcast in itself to get into. And it's also hard to just describe it. But slippery is associated with dampness. We also have like a soggy pulse, which to me somebody gave me the description once of cotton candy sitting on top of water. When you push the cotton candy, it sort of dissolves. So that can be an indication, or just like a weak, deep pulse as well. With Chinese medicine, patterns are often combined here. So spleen Qi deficiency can often just be thrown in with a whole slew of other pattern diagnoses. And because Earth, as I mentioned before, is often the center of the element theory here, we can look at spleen Qi deficiency being the center of the root of a lot of other patterns, dysfunctional patterns. I like to think of it as the microbiome. To me, like, microbiome trumps all. Like, if there's something off with your microbiome, if you're not even considering your microbiome when it comes to treatment and life in general, it's just going to be a seesaw effect. If you're not familiar with the microbiome, our body has like a 9-to-1 ratio of microbes to human cells. So we're basically a walking hotel for bugs. I mean, we're not even the ones who actually eat the raw material of food that enters our body. It's our microbes. They will absorb and process and break down that raw material, and then our human cells consume and absorb their byproduct, which that byproduct can be an array of beautiful anti-inflammatory nutrients, but depending on our lifestyle, our history, such as being born through C-section can be a factor, our diet, if we've done a bunch of courses of antibiotics across our life, there can be an overgrowth of certain microbes which will excrete a bunch of neurotoxins, which lead to chronic illness and things of the like. So for me, I got strep a lot as a kid, strep throat, and it was often treated with antibiotics, which completely wipe the microbiome clean. Yeah, it's an effective way to get rid of a microbe that may be causing illness, but it's a really great way to also kill all the microbes that exist inside of your gut, which are so precious. Like, they are good guys. There are a lot of good guys. There are some bad guys too, or maybe the better way to put it is bad byproducts from overgrowth of microbes. For the most part, if you're alive and living and functioning, you have more good microbes than bad ones in the body. So when you wipe that slate clean again and again, it, for me, caused a lot of issues, a lot of food sensitivities, allergies, anxiety. It's been known to cause depression, having a weakened microbiome. Actually, I read this study once. I'll see if I can find it so I can link it in the show notes, where there was a correlation of children using antibiotics more than twice a year are more prone, like the percentage of using it just once a year than using it a second time, they're more prone to anxiety and depression. But like after a second time, the percentage goes, like, it blows up. Which actually brings me to a question that somebody asked. So before, I want to touch on spleen Qi deficiency etiology. So what causes spleen Qi deficiency, as well as how to eat for spleen Qi deficiency. But before I do, this brings me into a question that somebody asked on Instagram. So they asked about pre, pro, and postbiotics. Should we be taking them all the time, and how to vet the sources? So I personally am not a fan of ingesting probiotics. That's because it's hard to find a brand that you can fully trust. There's this woman, Mary Ruddick, who is a specialist on the microbiome. Whatever she would suggest, I would trust. However, it's really difficult. It's a challenge for me to, without a like gut test, to decipher. I'm not a professional on the microbiome. It's hard for me personally to decipher which strain that I need. Because just like Chinese medicine, it's going to be a slew of a bunch of symptoms, and you have to put the puzzle pieces together to figure out what sort of pattern is at hand. So my way to work with the microbiome is through lifestyle and through food and herbs. So I can't give you suggestion on probiotics, but prebiotics you can find in your food. Carrots are an excellent source of prebiotics. So are dandelion, what do you call it? Dandelion leafy greens, like from dandelion plants. Swiss chard is an excellent source of prebiotics. So that's how I like to look at my food. I like to like not cook it. I used to cook my food at like hella high temperatures. Now I work on cooking it at lower temperatures, adding a little bit of water to more steam it. So in Chinese medicine, which brings me into a bit of treatment, the best way to treat spleen qi deficiency is through steaming food. It just really maintains the nutrients as much as it possibly can while under heat. Postbiotics, honestly, I've never heard of postbiotics. That's an interesting one. But I want to talk a little bit about lifestyle, how I live for my microbiome other than just by eating, because the microbiome is influenced by every single thing. So one thing that our microbes love is human connection. So hugs, human touch is an excellent, especially somebody that is like, to get esoteric here, of a high vibration. It's not even esoteric. It's almost like quantum physics. If somebody's operating at a like very pure, clean sort of frequency, when I say that, I think of rays that just go like whoa, whoa, whoa. Whereas somebody who's more operating at a more chaotic frequency would be like whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know if that made any sense to you. As I was about to say it out loud, I was thinking, Steph, this doesn't really make sense. But you know what? It might. So yeah, interacting with people, giving humans hugs, eating your food with good people is excellent for your microbiome. I truly believe it's not as much what you eat as much as it is how you eat it. Because back in 2020, when I was really sick, I was eating all the health foods, but I was freaking out right before I ate it. I was thinking, oh, please don't affect me. Please don't cause harm. And I was triggered into fight or flight. So before I eat my food, I like to take deep breaths. I like to just move into a state of deep gratitude, and I like to eat my food with good people. If I had the option of eating alone or with others, I'm going to eat with others. But I'm also in a time of my life where I am alone more than I am with others. And so I like to eat my food outside or looking out at the outside as much as I can. Staying away from screens. Blue light is going to be disruptive and create a chaotic frequency for your microbiome. Something I recently learned is that wearing sunglasses can disrupt the microbiome. And when we just slurp up the light refracting off of objects and it's influence into our body, especially sunlight, actually fluorescent light is going to create more of a chaotic frequency. So particularly sunlight is going to be excellent for the microbiome. So when you are wearing sunglasses, you are cutting off that connection for your microbes to absorb all that good frequency. And the last thing I want to I will say about the microbiome, something that I do, is by enabling as much as possible every day a state of awe and delight. I'm going to link in the show notes a really cool article that Mary Ruddick wrote about gamma frequency. And gamma frequency is this frequency where it's of awe of life, and it has amazing effects on the body being in this gamma state, and as well as on the microbes. And so sitting outside and looking up and seeing the light hit the trees. Actually, she literally said the light refracting off of trees is really good for that gamma frequency. That's good for the microbiome, aurora borealis, that state of awe when you look. And just as much as possible, I have this reminder on my phone that says stop and enjoy the moment. And it comes at every other day at like 2 p.m. And so when I look at my phone and I see that, I'm like, all right, stop and bring yourself into a state of awe. Not just for me, not for like my soul and my mental state, but for my microbes, which will also influence the mental state. I haven't really thought about the microbiome from a spiritual level, like what's really going on here. I'm just saying that out loud for myself to meditate on later. Okay, so that's that. Let's talk about how spleen Qi deficiency happens. So with most patterns, we're going to find dysfunction when we were in an extremely sedentary lifestyle, indoors, in front of a screen, overworking, as well as overworking out, especially women. When I hear when a woman comes to me for treatment and she's like, I'm like really excellent at working out. Usually I'm like, okay, that probably means they work out a little too much. So doing HIIT exercise like F45, like, anything over, in my opinion, like 3 times a week, and 3, in my opinion, is kind of pushing it. At least for me, 3 was pushing it for my body, but everybody has a different capacity, but also just being aware of your cycle too. At certain phases of our cycle, and depending what our cycle pattern is, we're going to be more sensitive towards exercises that spike cortisol levels, such as running long distances, HIIT, and also waking up at like 5 a.m. to work out. Also, let's throw in hot yoga classes, going like every single day, back-to-back classes. If you're the typical Western woman, you're deficient in yin energy, and going to hot yoga more than twice a week, contingent on your cycle, is going to have a negative effect. It might trigger some people to hear this, and this is my opinion, so take it or leave it. But that's overdoing it. That's going to put a lot of unnecessary stress on your system. For the spleen, particularly, being on your feet for extended periods of time, it's really typical for people who are sitting on their feet for long times to experience prolapse. That can hinder your spleen Qi, as well as not really taking your postpartum experience seriously. A lot of women, they're really more interested in bouncing back, getting that body back. They go on walks, they experience hemorrhoids, prolapse, bleeding. Those are all spleen Qi deficiency and other patterns, but huge source of that will be spleen Qi deficiency. Eating cold, raw foods, huge cause of spleen Qi deficiency that I see almost daily. And I'll have people come and say, I'm eating all the right things. I'm having the smoothies, the juices, the medical medium. The medical medium. Good God. God help us all with the with the medical medium in our lives. That's all I'm going to say about that. But like celery juice is likely going to cause dampness and spleen Qi deficiency. So why these foods cause spleen Qi deficiency is the stomach and the spleen, they rely on a warm fluid environment. So when we're introducing cold raw foods, we're requiring a whole lot more out of our digestive fire to process these things. I have a whole tangent on this, on like the beauty of fire with our food and the evolution of humankind on another podcast. I think it's either part 1 or part 2. I will link in the show notes. I think it's part 1 of the 10 ways you may be hurting your health, according to a student of Chinese medicine. To briefly touch on a Western perspective here, because my degree is in integrative medicine, raw veggies have a higher amount of oxalates, which are basically anti-nutrients, which can disrupt the absorption of certain minerals and other nutrients in the body, in the digestive system. So that's why traditional cultures will soak, sprout, steam, cook, ferment, etc., all their foods, including nuts and grains. But yeah, I always just tell people, again, think of the visual of a bowl of fruit being left out and forgotten. So when the spleen is like transforming and transporting, you go here, you go there, that's a lot of work to do. So having really complicated meals can also be a source of spleen qi deficiency. Actually, a lot of the herbs they use in Indian cuisine causes a lot of dampness, and in turn, spleen qi deficiency. So simplifying your meals and as well as cooking all your meals is really helpful for the spleen, so it doesn't have to work so hard to transport everything. So yeah, that all those raw foods usually kind of get left behind. I mean, in terms of an energetic sense, it gets left behind in the gut, and then they grow that dampness, and then everything, starts to unfold. So going more into diet that can help with spleen qi deficiency. So personally, what I do the majority of my meals tend towards the spleen qi. That way, I have found that when I eat like that, it really leaves a lot of room for me to have moments of indulging and going out to eat. But that is not my norm. I personally love my food above all other foods. Like if I'm not feeling well, if I'm sad, someone's like, what do you want? You can order whatever you want. All I can think of is like, I want my food. I want someone to make my food the way I do, because it's just become the ultimate source of nourishment. So what my diet usually mostly consists of, and what a spleen qi deficient, a diet for spleen qi deficiency would consist of, is cooked rice, congee. So you cook the rice, then you cook it even more, and it makes it kind of like a mush. In Chinese medicine, rice is life, and one of the most life-giving ways to cook your food is through steaming. So when you steam your rice, when you cook it in water for prolonged periods, it's going to boost the qi of the rice. All of that being said, I have recently learned that an excessive consumption of rice can actually disrupt our thiamine levels, which is our B1 levels. And the B vitamins are really important. So as much as I adore rice, especially it's really particularly white rice that contains toxins and just other additives that disrupt the B1. So I'm now opting more towards wild rice, quinoa, other grains. But yeah, that's a huge staple in my diet. And then, some sort of meat. And when I marinate my meat, I don't go hard on all of the herbs and spices. I used to do that a lot, but now I am I am such a slut for chicken thighs. I was trying to keep this podcast PG, but it's so hard for me to do that, guys. So yeah, slut for chicken thighs. Oh, the fat in it. Yum, yum, yum. Chicken breast can fucking kick it. Chicken breast sucks compared to chicken thighs, in my opinion. So with all that higher fat content in my meat, I don't really need that much added flavor to it. So but I will marinate my chicken, because that's going to make the chicken taste way better and make it more tender. And of course, I switch up my meats. I'll have red meat, fish, etc. It's really all dependent on how I'm feeling and where I'm at in my cycle. And then I will have 1 to 2 veggies, maybe sometimes 3, But again, I'm coming from this lens of I don't want to overcomplicate the transformation and transportation function. So I do tend towards zucchini and yellow squash. Yellow squash is like a quintessential, in my opinion, spleen Qi deficiency vegetable, but so would be potato. Although personally, I'm not a huge fan of potato. There's a whole other tangent I could get into that, but I'm not going to right now. Sweet potato, basically root veggies as well as squash based veggies. I also gravitate towards zucchini because I find it delicious, but also it's a more yin nourishing vegetable, and I have a bit of a tendency in some ways towards a yin deficiency, as do a lot of women. So I always have to catch myself though, because if I could, I would eat those two vegetables every day for the rest of my life, but that is not contingent with my whole microbiome theory here, because the microbes need in order to stay balanced, they need variety. So I will switch it up. But again, per meal, when I'm making my own food, I keep it at 1 to 2 veggies to keep things simple. And remember, this is just what works for me, and I won't claim that it works for everyone. And that's why I won't do a what I eat in a day post over social media, because my pattern is not your pattern. So why would I influence you to eat like me? Which actually brings me to a question that I got on Instagram, is if I follow eating for blood type. No, I don't. Or like what I think about it. I've studied it and I think it's interesting information to refer to, but I don't follow any pre-organized diet. I follow what my body wants. So that really ties it all up. There are definitely a lot of other ways to treat spleen Qi deficiency, but I'm going to leave it there. And then I just want to mention 2 patterns that are so really typical branches off of spleen Qi deficiency, especially based on a diet that causes spleen Qi deficiency. And one of that is damp accumulation in the middle jiao. That case would be more somebody who holds on to a lot of weight, has a much higher ratio of fat to muscle in the body, maybe some muscle with almost like marbled muscle, like muscle with a lot of fatty tissue striations, which can have an influence on the endocrine system, like the hormones, metabolism, metabolic disease. And then kind of on the progressed side of that would be muscular atrophy. That would also be somebody who's just like very gassy and bloated, feeling swollen and edema in the body. And then cold accumulation the pain is different from a spleen Qi deficiency, because accumulation is another term for stagnation. So somebody who is having a lot of iced sort of drinks, a lot of smoothies with ice, juices with ice, salads, they're feeling like a very sharp pain that is worse with touch. And drinking cold water, anything cold, any exposure to the cold, literally like from just like the skin, is going to aggravate those symptoms. That tongue is actually going to look like quite blue, sometimes bluish purple. And their pulse would feel really tight and slow, because cold slows everything down. For people who are familiar with meat, I try to give them the visual of like, picture meat with gravy when you put it in the fridge, how it coagulates. Same with dampness, the damp accumulation. But cold is going to just coagulate and slow everything down. Which brings me into another question that somebody asked through Instagram, is why dairy causes phlegm or cravings for spicy food. So when damp has accumulated over a long time, and there's that perfect storm of cold conditions as well, and other sort of stagnations in the body, could be qi, can be blood, it can cause the accumulation of phlegm. So think of damp sitting for a long time, the mold grows, and then something other than mold, like you don't even know what that shit is, starts to grow. And I think of like the color of phlegm, like a yellow, greenish, whitish sort of ball of gunk. So in Chinese medicine, we have two types of phlegm. We have substantial phlegm. So that's the typical phlegm, like when you're like coughing up and you see phlegm in your tissue or your hand or on the floor, or when you're blowing your nose and you see those boogies. That's substantial phlegm. There's also non-substantial phlegm, and that is a really, really interesting concept because this is how damp contribute towards a pattern of mental illness. Damp over a long period of time can cause a non-substantial phlegm, and where that phlegm goes, it starts to rise up, and they say that it mists the mind. So that's where that component of brain fog and mental fatigue can segue into something more serious, whether that's Alzheimer's or dementia or a psychotic break. Sometimes phlegm missing the mind can cause a fracturing within reality because that phlegm, they say it obstructs the orifices. And our spirit in Chinese medicine is very strongly influenced by our eyes, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, and what we smell. And so having those orifices obstructed can, again, cause a fracturing of reality. Again, this is all from a Chinese medicine perspective, not necessarily from, like a typical psychological or even spiritual perspective. But I think that bringing them all together can really land home for a lot of people. So the treatment principle for that would be clearing the orifices. And I'd say there's a few plant medicines which are great for that. They'll clear right out through your orifices, if you know what I mean. So why dairy causes phlegm? That's more of a substantial phlegm. Well, dairy causes dampness. Think about what dairy looks like, especially like very goopy. Like I think of mozzarella cheese, especially like a burrata. Oh my gosh, that is like phlegm incarnate. And so cheese is cold in nature, and the alkaloids within cheese is just not always the easiest for the body to digest if there's a lot going on within a meal. Again, a lot of factors to transport and transform. Cheese is one of the last things. And so it sits and it causes dampness, and which eventually can lead towards substantial phlegm. Cravings for spicy food. I've never actually honestly heard of that of dairy causing a craving for spicy food, but I guess what you could think of is a flavor profile, how the sweetness of cheese, let's go back to the 5-element theory. Fire influences earth. Cheese has a more sweet nature to it. Not literally tasting sweet, but the way that interacts with the body is more towards that sweetness. And again, damp is influenced by the earth element. So for me, that's where my head goes. I also think of how back in ancient China, there weren't a lot of typically very sweet, Chinese medicine developed a lot in like rural areas. So I don't believe there was a ton of sweet things going on. I think, again, what they meant was the energy of sweetness. And dairy creates this dopamine hit. So to me, category sweetness. So that fire element, adding a pungent or spicy flavored thing is going to balance out the flavor profile for the body. So that's where my mind goes with that question. Okay, didn't realize that this whole podcast would be about spleen qi deficiency, but there was a lot of, like I said, like little segues of information associated with it. So let's talk about the other pattern that's really common in this practice and is associated with the earth element, stomach fire. So if the spleen is yin, then the yang to the spleen is the stomach. So the action of the stomach is also to transport and transform, but it has this more just fast moving, turning things around. Like peristalsis is a thing for a reason, which to me, I love the concept. Well, not the concept, I love the action, like just the whole word peristalsis, but also the visualization that I get with it. but that which is the contraction of the belly to turn over the food. And think of it, the stomach is a very acidic environment, and acid is very yang and energy, in my opinion. So the stomach is very reliant on fluids and very susceptible to experiencing the pathogen of fire as well as dryness. And I'll get into that in a second. But in terms of qi, the quality of qi that's associated with the stomach is to move down. It's downward moving. So spleen and again, that beautiful yin and yang, spleen holding, lifting, stomach drawing things down, moving it to the next section of the small intestine, the large intestine, bladder, and then excrement. The stomach is very susceptible to fire. How that plays out is really spicy foods. Also, coffee. Coffee is very fire in nature, and it's also very drying as well. This kind of brings me into the other side of the coin for this pattern, which is stomach yin deficiency. Stomach fire and yin deficiency, they're very, very similar, but fire is more of an accumulation, stagnation in nature. So somebody who experiences stomach fire will typically have a more robust constitution. They'll be thicker, more red in the cheeks and ruddy. They're going to have often halitosis, but that's also with stomach yin deficiency. With stomach fire also, they're very susceptible to bleeding gums, cavities, as well as mouth sores, because that's that fire coming up. So our oral health is a huge indicator of the health of our digestive system. Think about how if you're not eating, things that are really rocking your world inside your body, then you're going to have a certain kind of stinky breath. Well, that breath is it's from the microbe of the gut. And then what's also fascinating to me is the oral microbiome is completely different from the gut one. And they will still influence each other and communicate with each other. And each side of your tooth has a different population of microbes. So one of my favorite terms in Chinese medicine is rebellious qi. So when the stomach qi is not doing what it needs to do, when there's fire and dryness involved, then that qi is going to move up. It's going to rebel. So some symptoms of rebelling qi would be hiccups, belching, vomiting, acid reflux, or there's different types of acid reflux. I'm talking more about when you literally feel a fluid moving up your throat. That's going to be a stomach fire or yin deficiency symptom. Stomach fire tongue is going to be red with a thick yellow or yellow coat, or the coat could even be brown or have sort of a geographic look where it's a patchy coat, which can also be a presentation of stomach yin deficiency. By the way, a typical perfect, quote unquote, perfect balanced tongue is going to be regular in size, pink, thin white coat. So that fire, right, is going to rise and scorch the tongue here. The pulse is going to feel rapid and surging. So let's tap into stomach yin deficiency for a moment here. What can cause yin deficiency is also spicy foods, but also very drying foods such as crackers. Crackers are honestly horrible for just the biome, the mouth health, the gut health in general, in my opinion. Do I still eat crackers? Hell yeah, but it's just a moderation thing. And I make sure to balance it out, with things that are going to generate fluids. If you're somebody experiencing stomach fire or stomach yin deficiency, the methods of cooking that are going to exacerbate your symptoms are frying and oven roasted foods, because the oven kind of slurps out all the moisture. So let's go back to that steaming foods and all that good stuff. Here's a interesting sort of difference here though. Stomach fire, as I mentioned before, is an accumulation. It's an excess condition. So they would actually be a candidate for a cold, raw diet to help slow everything down. Which pulls me to mention a very important symptom with stomach fire, which is excessive hunger. It's like no matter how much you eat, you're constantly hungry because that fire is constantly consuming. And so it's interesting how I see it is the nutrients aren't properly being transported and transformed in the body from our food. But so you can be eating a lot of food, but it's being scorched by the fire within. So it's like those people who are like, I drink so much water, I don't know why, I'm still thirsty all the time, or I'm presenting all these dehydration symptoms. It's because the body isn't properly absorbing the proper nutrients from the water that it needs. Okay, so cold raw diet would actually be beneficial for a stomach fire candidate. However, one of the most important things you will ever hear me say within a Chinese medicine podcast, or if I'm treating you, is that no pattern is ever going to be the same. Thus, no diet is ever going to be beneficial for you across the span of your entire life. You have to constantly listen and change and act accordingly. So that cold raw diet will be really great for you for a couple of weeks, couple of months. But the moment that you start to feel that cold symptom or things slowing down or things just not running the way that they should. I think of myself in 2019 for 9 months I was vegan, and into 2020 I was like really trying to figure out like I'm so fatigued. I want to work out the way I want to, but I just have no energy, and I tried to do all the macros and tried to stay vegan, but I didn't know anything about Chinese medicine then. But I eventually had some animal protein and felt amazing. It humbled me. And so I realized I needed to change. And then now knowing what I know, I understand what was at hand. Being vegan felt amazing for me because I had some excess conditions that needed to be resolved through cutting out meat and dairy in my life. And then once those conditions changed, once my body reset itself, because the body will always find balance, it will always reset itself. Once that happens, then it's time to listen and go back to the drawing board. And some people might hear this and be like, "Ugh, when does it ever end?" It never ends. You are human. This is the condition of being human. Change is the condition. So don't resist it, flow with it, and everything will change. You'll stop thinking that you're so fucked up. I have told so many patients, like just off the bat, I want to start by saying that there is nothing wrong with you. These symptoms are your body telling you, hey, something is off. That is an intelligence from within. And whatever's wrong with you, like I can't tell you how many times I thought that this was going to be my life forever, but it wasn't. It will always change, whether that's for our benefit or our detriment. I mean, in the end, it's always going to be a benefit if you let it be. And then diet for stomach yin deficiency. Yeah, you could do some cold raw food with that, but I would do it in moderation because there's a lack of fluid in the body. It's not so much that the fire is flaring, it's that the water is diminished in the body, the water element, the yin element. So yeah, like maybe some juices, like having more juices, like adding more things to your fluid, because water isn't probably going to cut it. You're probably going to need some extra fluids, maybe some cucumber, lemon water, stuff like that. I feel like that's where I want to stop with the stomach and the spleen. If you have any questions or concerns with that, please feel free to reach out. I love this stuff. But I want to get into my last pattern, which was the pattern that brought me to the table of Chinese medicine. It is, in my opinion, one of the shittiest patterns. It's really rough to deal with. And that is called liver overacting on spleen. So let's introduce the liver here if you're not familiar. The liver's job is, in terms of qi, they call it the general of qi. So rather than up or down or sideways, it does all of the directions. The liver tells everything where to go in terms of qi. It is the general. The liver's element is going to be wood. Wood is all about expansion. The color is green. The flavor is sour. The emotion is frustration, anger, and the sound is traditionally shouting or angry noises, but I would also say sighing. And it's not that sigh of like, that's actually going to be excellent for your liver and help spread your qi. It's more of this, that to me, if somebody's making that sound, if I'm making that sound, I'm like, all right, let's spread the liver. How are we going to spread the liver? So the liver is really strongly influenced by our nervous system. I mean, everything in the body is influenced by the nervous system, but the liver really, like that fight or flight reflex or freeze. In my opinion, the liver has a really strong relationship with that. So as I mentioned before, when I was going into a sympathetic state right before eating my food because I wasn't sure if this was going to be the food that was going to put me out for the rest of the day, I was aggravating my liver a lot. And when the liver gets aggravated and it's unable to do that action of spreading everything, it starts to get stagnant and it starts to pull energy from the earth element. So let's jump back to the 5-element theory. So fire, earth, metal, water, wood. So we have a little star, and each line of the star points to like an arrow towards an element. So for example, the fire element would point down to the metal would point up to the wood, and we'll stop here. The wood would point to the right to the earth element. And this is called the overacting cycle or the insulting cycle. If you look in the show notes, I'm going to put a chart for the overacting cycle, but you'll see that wood is pointing towards earth. So that liver pathway can very easily overact on the earth pathway. How I also can see it is worry. When rage is put into the equation, rage will often trump worry, but rage is often the protector of worry, the quote unquote protector, because we think by being full of rage and angry and kind of like puffing ourselves up and being like, fuck this, fuck that, fuck everyone, that we think that we're fooling people into thinking that we're tough. But the truth is at least when I see that, I know that truly what's happening is there's a deep worry inside, and as well as fear, but that's another element. So with the liver overacting on earth or liver overacting on spleen, repressed rage is a huge factor, which brings me back to my story. I started to get better when I started seeing somebody who practiced applied kinesiology, which has to do with a lot of muscle testing, but I did start to hit a wall. And the chiropractor who was treating me, his daughter was an acupuncturist, and she encouraged me to read this book called The Web That Has No Weaver, which is a book on Chinese medicine. And when I read it, I found liver overacting spleen or wood overacting earth, and it was me to a T. And everything in Chinese medicine has to do with emotions. But what did not feel like it was me was they talked about how anger or repressed anger was a huge influence. And I was like, me? Angry? Nah, I practice yoga. I'm like the peacekeeper in the family. Well, I have learned that some of the most gentle peacekeeping souls are the ones that are holding on to the most rage, because that rage doesn't match our definition of who we are and how we exist in the world. So I've told this story before in the podcast. It led me into something called dynamic meditations, which are very emotionally intensive meditations where you bring up repressed emotions. So I thought I was just going to cry. Nah, I was angry. I was rageful. I was very surprised. And so I did it for 5 weeks straight, and my symptoms started to subside. I wasn't having harsh reactions to everything I ate. So let's talk a bit about the symptoms here. So they would be stabbing pain, the hypochondria, acid reflux, feeling very anxious or flighty, having explosions of rage, which was definitely something I was having at the time. Period cramps could be a symptom. Having there's an element of qi stagnation within liver overacting spleen, which if you haven't picked that up by now, and a typical bowel movement of that liver qi stagnation would be, we call it goat pellet poop. So it's poop coming out in pellets rather than in a full flow. It's like a I could not myself with that one. But yeah, having that kind of poop will definitely be an indicator of that pattern, or that you're heading towards that pattern. But the really classic poop is alternating constipation and diarrhea. That's going to be more indicative of this sort of pattern here. The eyes are going to be the sense organs associated with the wood element with the liver. So watching things on a blue light screen while eating isn't going to help. It's actually going to drain yin fluids from the body. And again, like I said before, it's going to create that chaotic frequency within your microbiome. So looking at something green can really help, which talking about green things and talking about the eyes kind of leads me towards something that I wanted to touch on here. So during this time, I felt like I could not eat unless I got high, because smoking weed brought my system down. It flooded me with dopamine. But long term, I didn't realize it was doing me a massive disservice, because the act of smoking, including vaporization and dab pens, is hot and drying. And so I was having a combination of liver overacting spleen and stomach yin deficiency. And so over time, all of that smoking was draining my stomach yin, and it was exacerbating my rebellious qi symptoms, which the worst one was the acid reflux. Ugh. I'm like I can feel like a ghost of that little pinch on my throat just talking about it. And yeah, it's also just going to raise the acidity of the body. So in the long run, smoking weed is actually, it's creating a cycle of, your body's going to calm down so you can stomach your food, and so you can have an appetite, because that's another symptom of the liver overacting spleen is the loss of appetite, bloating, nausea, stomach pain, abdominal distension. But you're just further contributing to the pattern at hand here. So as I mentioned earlier, all these patterns, they're all just like weaving together, and you can have many different patterns at once. And the cause of a lot of these patterns kind of begins with the earth element. So you could also see the liver overacting spleen wood overacting earth pattern as a combination of spleen qi deficiency with liver qi stagnation. So in terms of food therapy, food for spleen qi deficiency would be great. Also, foods that will cool and calm down the liver would be like bitter greens, dandelion leaf. I don't know why I keep on wanting to say dandelion leaf. I don't know if that's greens, dandegreens, Swiss chard, spinach, but I would recommend cooking the spinach because raw spinach does have oxalates in it, which are in some communities known as anti-nutrients because they bind to minerals, which can interfere with absorption in the body. So it's recommended to cook it. But also, interesting fun fact is dairy can help neutralize the effect of the oxalates. So if you want to have your raw spinach, have some dairy with that. Have some goat cheese. That sounds really nice right now. Yeah, just bitter greens. In my notes here, I have a recommendation of sour foods, but I want to give like a caveat here is for me, like I was having sauerkraut, I was having I was craving very zesty foods. And with hindsight, it made all my symptoms worse because I was already experiencing like a constriction, all that repressed energy. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend for everyone to soothe the liver to have some quote unquote sour based foods. I think because I was at an excess within the liver, I was craving that because it was just like my cravings were out of whack. I think that there is a deep wisdom within cravings. However, yeah, when the microbiome's kind of funky and when some organ systems are in an excess or deficiency, I think it's good to question what those cravings are. So for example, in spleen Qi deficiency, usually a huge cause of that is malnutrition. And so what the body's going to crave is easily accessible, highly palatable foods. So packaged carbs, sugars that are just easy to absorb for energy, but it's a quick high, quick crash. But play around with that. If this pattern feels like it's you and you want to start playing around with food therapy, play around with the sours. This is just my experience and I just want to share that wisdom. All right. That is it from me. I did want to go over one last pattern, but I don't have the time. I don't think I have it in me to do it. It's blood deficiency. Basically, it felt worth mentioning because especially women are so blood deficient from our cycles, from giving birth, and from diet culture. So eat your meat, basically. And if you are so married to being vegan or vegetarian, then look into blood building foods. In terms of things like liver qi, liver overacting spleen, as well as blood deficiency, in my experience, and all of these patterns, by the way, I have had. That's why I've brought them up, because I want to speak from the wisdom of my whispers. So in terms of for myself, those patterns, except for maybe spleen Qi deficiency, were best treated with herbal therapy. That's just how it was for me, especially the liver overacting spleen. Herbal therapy was like, it created a night and day difference, as well as really focusing on lifestyle and expressing versus repressing and doing a whole deep dive into my psyche. Truly, those were the things that really, like, diet helped a bit, but nothing really turned the dial more than that. So if you are experiencing these sort of things, yes, we can look into herbs. I do want to warn herbs. I am my patient zero, and I have made many mistakes with herbal formulas. And if that's who you are, if you are very dedicated and consistent with your responding and researching here, then like go for it. I was talking to a friend last night because she was wanting to microdose this herb that she has, but she was afraid that she wasn't going to do it right. It was more of a spiritually based herb. And I told her, like, I totally get it that you want to be honoring, and, like, look at it as a friendship. start to form your own relationship. Start with a walk before you run, before you have this whole elaborate ceremony, and embrace the fact that you're going to make some mistakes. Like, you and your friend are going to go on some misadventures sometimes. I've gone on many misadventures with my herbal friends, and it's only deepened my relationship with them. So if you're like in it for the long run and you have that sort of mindset, like, explore, play around, do your own research. But I also recommend you work with an herbalist. That completely changed the game for me. I was not struggling with as many intensive symptoms when I finally reached out. Because something to mention with Chinese medicine, there's this amazing book called Lady Tan's Circle of Women, and there's this elder in the book who it's about Chinese medicine in China in like the 1400s for women. And one of the elders of the medicine said to her apprentice, who was her granddaughter, that only a fool diagnoses themselves. Basically what that means is it's so easy to become myopic when it comes to diagnosing our own patterns and treating our own symptoms. And we think that like this symptom is the end all be all. When you can invite somebody else into the conversation, it just enables a wider perspective, and it's just easier. Like it's just easier, I think, for a third party who's not emotionally attached to come in to help. So you can reach out to me. You can find your nearest herbalist in your town, research Chinese medicine. Like if you're in the state of Florida, if you find an acupuncturist, they had to study herbs and pass a board in herbal medicine. Not all herbalists are going to be equal in terms of wisdom and knowledge, and also just willingness to work with herbs. So you'll have to ask around. But yeah, that's it from me, folks. I will include in the show notes one of the books. I think it's a little tad bit outdated, but it's got incredible knowledge, which is Healing with Whole Foods by Paul Pitchford. And it's a Chinese medicine-based food therapy Bible. It is massive, and you could read it forever for the rest of your life, and you will learn something new every single time. Thank you so much for being here. Again, questions, concerns, reach out. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you gained any sort of nugget, make sure to leave a rating, review, to share with a friend. And I am sending you my love as always.